Hello, and welcome to Bedtime Dreams, a snug little spot where evening stories and gentle relaxation lead the way to a peaceful night's sleep. Tonight, we share another soothing tale designed to calm your thoughts and invite a sense of comforting tranquility. But first, let's pause for a moment to prepare body and mind for rest. Find a comfortable position, and with each slow inhale and gentle exhale, imagine the day's worries drifting away. Detaching from daily busyness can be tough, especially as bedtime nears. But remember, the less we worry about falling asleep, the more easily our minds can release lingering tension. Allow the gentle rhythm of your breathing to wash away any leftover concerns, and let tonight's story guide you into deep relaxation. Now, settle in and let the warm, comforting atmosphere of bedtime dreams envelop you. Enjoy the story, and may your night be peaceful and restorative. Once upon a time, there was a merchant named Laurent who had invested his entire wealth in a fleet of ships, only to tragically lose them all to the unforgiving sea. As a widower, he didn't have the burden of delivering this sorrowful news to a wife, but he did have 6 children who were used to living in comfort and luxury. When the creditors came calling and word got out that the family was now impoverished, it hit them hard. With each day that passed without a sign of the ships, Laurent found himself compelled to part with their cherished possessions, selling off furniture, their carriage, and even his daughter's beautiful jewelry and elegant gowns. They were forced to leave their grand home behind and move into a humble cottage at the edge of town. Laurent often ventured away, searching for new investments and partners to help restore his business. Meanwhile, his 3 sons and 3 daughters, though mostly grown, lacked the practical skills necessary to manage their household. While the older siblings struggled with their new circumstances, Camille, the youngest daughter, embraced her responsibilities eagerly, learning how to run a home without any help. Well loved in the village, Camille sought guidance from her neighbors on baking bread, sewing clothes, tending to gardens, and caring for chickens. Her enthusiasm for learning and her diligent work ethic endeared her to the villagers, who grew increasingly fond of her. Over time, she became the steadfast support that held Laurent's family together. As her older siblings wrestled with their new way of life, Camille ensured that their home remained tidy and meals were prepared with care. Nearly 2 years into this new chapter of their lives, Laurent received wonderful news. One of his lost ships had returned to port, with most of its cargo still intact. The family rejoiced at this unexpected stroke of luck. While the older siblings were eager to abandon their simple life among the villagers, Camille found joy in their cozy cottage, adorned with a neat garden and filled with the warm aroma of freshly baked bread. Although she delighted in seeing her family so happy again, she felt uncertain about returning to their previous life of indulgence. She had discovered a deep sense of fulfillment in being helpful and appreciated. To reclaim his possessions, Laurent set out on horseback towards the port, a journey that would take him a few days. Once he arrived, he planned to oversee the fair distribution of his regained fortune and hire a comfortable carriage for his return trip. Eagerly anticipating their brighter future, he asked each of his children what gift they wished for from the city. The older ones requested extravagant items: silk shoes adorned with shimmering buckles, hats embellished with elaborate designs, plush velvet capes, cuddly bears, and sparkling jewels. Camille, however, remained quiet, lost in thought about her own desired present. When her father encouraged her to share her wish, she took a moment before replying, "Father, I have always dreamed of seeing a rose. They don't bloom where we live and are so rare and precious." She expressed her longing for just one rose in any color that delighted her heart. Laurent chuckled at his youngest child's unusual request, but agreed without hesitation. Secretly, he decided to surprise her with a necklace or another small treasure to accompany the flower. On the morning of his departure, the weather was delightful. Camille carefully filled his saddlebag with supplies for the journey and bid him farewell with a bittersweet smile that glistened with unshed tears. The others were more indifferent, used to their father's absences and solely focused on the gifts they hoped to receive upon his return. As he rode away along the sun-dappled forest path, Camille stood alone outside their cottage until he disappeared from view. A wave of unease washed over her, yet she chose to keep it to herself. After all, their fortunes seemed to be shifting for the better. While Laurent's children waited at home, he steadily made his way towards the bustling port city, filled with hope of recovering his wealth and restoring his status. It was true that he had faced considerable losses. Yet with the cargo secured on the ship, he envisioned starting anew, perhaps even establishing a fleet of ships in time. His mind danced with dreams of importing fragrant spices, luxurious silks, and other treasures in the days ahead. Thus, it was truly heartbreaking when he arrived, only to find his dreams dashed into pieces. Indeed, the ship had returned, bringing with it most of its cargo. However, the news of his fortunate luck spread like wildfire, prompting his many creditors to spring into action. By the time Laurent arrived to reclaim his belongings, they had already been distributed to settle his numerous debts. Despite his attempts to negotiate with various merchants for an extension on his hefty bills, all efforts were in vain. As the day drew to a close, he found himself free of debt, but utterly empty-handed. There was no money left for him to invest, nor any funds available to buy the gifts he had promised his family. Feeling utterly disheartened, he decided against spending another night in the city. Without taking the time to gather supplies or consider the approaching storm, and without sending any word ahead, Laurent mounted his weary horse and rode out of town, retracing the provincial road that had led him to the port that very morning. A few hours outside the city, darkness enveloped him as a fierce storm rolled in. Lightning crackled and thunder rumbled all around, while powerful winds tore branches from trees. Startled by the chaos, Laurent's horse bolted off the main road and into an unknown forest. Realizing too late how unwise it was to undertake this journey in such conditions, Laurent began searching desperately for shelter from the howling wind, perhaps a cave or some refuge from the storm. He lost track of time as his horse wandered through the tempest until at last a tall stone wall loomed before him. Urging his horse onward, he hoped he had stumbled upon a house where he could find safety. However, As they approached the imposing wall of stone, it became clear that it was not a home. It surrounded an estate. A grand iron gate stood slightly ajar. With no time for niceties, Laurent dismounted and pushed open the heavy gate wide enough to lead his horse through. Together, they made their way up a paved path that disappeared into the swirling shadows ahead. With leaves swirling around him and rain drenching him from every direction, Laurent could barely make out the massive structure emerging through the thick gloom. It was unmistakably a mansion, a grand sight amidst the stormy night. Though his view was somewhat obscured, he could make out the grand entrance and numerous spacious rooms adorned with tall windows. It was a rather imposing sight for anyone to approach uninvited, yet he had no alternative. The thought of spending the night exposed to the elements filled him with dread. He desperately needed shelter. After securely tying his horse in a protected nook, he made his way to the enormous front door and grasped the iron knocker. He let it fall, its echo resonating through the dimness as if responding to distant thunder. When no one answered, he inhaled deeply and pushed against the door with all his strength. To his relief, it yielded, and he stumbled into the grand entryway, nearly collapsing onto the cold stone floor. For a moment, Laurent lay there, catching his breath amidst the eerie silence. The rain continued to batter against the front steps outside through a gap in the towering door, and he felt grateful that he had managed to secure shelter for his horse. Rising slowly in the dim light, he took in his surroundings. He found himself in an impressive reception area, where a sweeping staircase curved elegantly on either side. Suits of armor stood watch at intervals around the room. In front of him loomed a pair of intricately carved double doors. The stillness within was profound. It was so quiet that one might have heard a pin drop. Yet a gentle glow peeked through the cracks of the doors ahead. After hesitating and making a few tentative calls into the emptiness, he finally steadied himself and approached the illuminated room, gradually pushing the doors open. As he stepped inside, his gaze swept across the space. A roaring fire crackled cheerfully in an expansive hearth, while a table set for one displayed a simple yet inviting array of dishes, alongside a carafe and a large glass waiting patiently. His eyes wandered around the cozy room, taking note of plush chairs and tables scattered with books that hinted at stories yet untold. However, there was no sign of the homeowner. Laurent awkwardly settled into one of the inviting armchairs and waited for a moment. The delicious aroma of the meal before him proved irresistible, drawing his gaze to the loaf of bread and the tantalizing scent of roasted meat. As time ticked by with no one arriving, his stomach let out a loud growl, compelling him to give in to his hunger. He made his way to the table, starting with a slice of bread and gradually indulging in the entire feast at a leisurely pace. An hour passed in peaceful silence. He assumed the owner was away, seeking shelter from the storm. Enjoying a deep sip from his glass, he eagerly polished off the rest of his dinner. Convinced that the homeowner was absent, Laurent reassured himself that he could explain his unexpected presence in the morning. After savoring every bite, he leaned back contentedly in his chair and emptied the carafe. The crackling fire enveloped him in warmth as he finished the last drop from his glass and pulled out the letter regarding his recovered cargo ship from his pocket. Once filled with hope, his dreams had now faded away. Without thinking, he pushed the letter aside on the table and drifted into a deep sleep. Throughout the night, he slumbered peacefully without any dreams. When morning came, it took him a moment to gather his thoughts about where he was. The fire had long since died down, and remnants of last night's meal still lingered on the table. It appeared that the homeowner had not yet returned. Feeling a wave of embarrassment for having intruded into someone else's home, discomfort washed over him. Rather than waiting for the homeowner's arrival, Laurent decided to leave quietly and swiftly. He rationalized that any uneaten food would have gone to waste anyway. Rising from his chair, he crossed the room and opened the double doors. Soft light filtered into the entryway, illuminating the stark hallway more clearly than it had during the night. As he stepped cautiously into the foyer, it felt as though he were walking on eggshells among the vigilant suits of armor lining the walls, half expecting them to spring to life and block his path. Glancing at the grand twin staircases adorned with their neglected ornate carpet runners, he couldn't shake off the feeling that this place had been empty for quite some time. As he approached the grand front door, he grasped the handles firmly and summoned all his strength to pull it open, revealing a misty courtyard beyond. Once he slipped through the threshold and closed the door behind him, he straightened his waistcoat, striving to regain his composure. Though a sense of unease washed over him for leaving the imposing mansion under the cover of darkness, he resolved to put this embarrassing episode behind him. He quickly made his way back to the alcove where his horse had been tethered the night before, feeling a wave of relief wash over him when he found her safe and sound. Reaching into his saddlebag, he retrieved an apple, a leftover from Camille's provisions, and offered it to the grateful creature. Untying the horse, he led her quietly along the stone path that he had navigated through the blustery night before. A glance over his shoulder revealed the mansion standing tall and foreboding in the light of dawn. The expansive chateau stretched out in a long rectangle, its central section flanked by matching wings on either side. Tall, narrow windows lined its two imposing stories in a precise arrangement, as if they were watching him intently. The grand structure was crowned with a sloping tiled roof, adorned with thick chimneys that added to its formidable presence. Shifting his gaze away from the daunting chateau, he guided his horse toward the front gate, taking note of the untamed gardens on either side. As he neared the end of the path, a charmingly wild pergola caught his eye, draped in blooming rose bushes. In the heart of a circular seating area stood one particular rose bush that showcased some of the most exquisite pink blooms he had ever encountered. Remembering his promise to Camille, his youngest daughter, he felt a surge of determination to keep his word. With a knife from his bag in hand, he eagerly began snipping away at the delicate roses, intending to gather them all as a token of his commitment. So engrossed was he in this task that he failed to notice footsteps approaching until it was too late. Stepping back from the now bare bush, an unsettling sensation crept over him, as if someone were watching. Turning around slowly, he found himself face to face with a rugged figure whose stern gaze held him captive. while this being bore some resemblance to a man. Their wild mane of facial hair and unusually tall, muscular frame set them apart. Clearly startled and looking disheveled in hastily donned linen shirt and breeches, this figure radiated an unmistakable fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he snarled, his voice low and menacing like that of a wolf. Laurent stood frozen in place, acutely aware of the bouquet clutched tightly in his left hand. Stumbling over his words, he explained that he thought the house was empty and believed the roses would go unnoticed. Noticing no shift in the man's fearsome demeanor, he weakly added that he had promised roses to his daughter. The man in the linen shirt, exuding an air of authority, remained silent for a moment, seemingly weighing his response. Straightening up, he declared firmly, "You have taken advantage of my hospitality without consent. You dined and rested here, which I was willing to overlook. However, by plundering my beloved rosebush, you have crossed a line. Each flower is precious to me and irreplaceable. I insist that you find a way to make amends for this loss." As these words settled in, Laurent felt a wave of despair wash over him. He shook his head in defeat, admitting he had nothing to offer as compensation. The stern host regarded him with icy eyes. "Then you must work to repay your debt," he stated decisively. "I need laborers at my estate." Laurent gazed at him imploringly, trying to suggest another option. "But sir," he protested, "I have 6 children waiting for me at home. I cannot stay here. What will become of them?" The man remained unmoved by Laurent's plight. "Either you work off your debt, or someone from your family must take your place," he insisted. "Take your roses. They are of no use to me now," the man continued coldly. "Return to your family and make arrangements. I expect either you or a replacement within a week. Should you fail to appear, there will be consequences." With that final word, the stern figure turned away and strode back into the chateau without a backward glance. Laurent watched him disappear into the grand building, realizing he had no choice but to return home and prepare his children for his impending absence. Perhaps once the man calmed down, he would release Laurent from this obligation. As he rode steadily but slowly back home, thoughts swirled in his mind about how to break the news to his family. Despite the beauty of the day, the mist lifting and sunlight streaming through, the weight in his heart made him dread what lay ahead. He arrived home late that night to find his children eagerly awaiting him, their faces lit up with excitement as they anticipated gifts from their father. As they rushed forward with joyful shouts, they eagerly rummaged through his saddlebags for treasures he had promised them. With a heavy heart, Laurent instead offered each child a single rose from the bouquet. Camille took hers first and inhaled its sweet fragrance with delight, marveling at its beauty. However, his other 5 children were not satisfied. They clamored for their real presents instead. That evening, gathered around the bustling kitchen table, Laurent shared the tale of his unfortunate expedition to the port city with his children. He spoke of the loss of his remaining wealth and the events that had led him to owe a debt to the enigmatic owner of the distant chateau. As he reached the end of his story, revealing that he would need to return and labor to repay what he owed, his 5 eldest children were not pleased. They sulked, questioning how they would manage without him. Camille, however, remained quiet. With an inscrutable expression on her face, she sat deep in thought. At last, she called for hush among her siblings, who looked at her in surprise. Camille was not one to often voice her opinions. She boldly declared that she would take her father's place at the chateau. Laurent's eyes filled with tears as he protested vehemently against such a notion. Yet Camille's logical arguments were hard to refute. Their father was needed at home to support the family. She, on the other hand, could be spared. Furthermore, she possessed some household skills that would enable her to manage any cleaning or cooking tasks assigned to her. In conclusion, she firmly stated that there was no other reasonable alternative. She would be the one to work off their family's debt. It took Camille a day or two to gather her simple belongings for the journey ahead. As the rose her father had given her began to fade, she pressed it between the pages of a book to preserve it, a reminder of why she was leaving home to serve a stranger in a far-off and lonely estate. Though apprehensive about leaving behind all that was familiar, Camille was resolute in her desire to make her father proud. The morning of Camille's departure arrived bright and clear. Together with Laurent, they loaded her belongings into a small cart hitched to their loyal mare. The chateau lay 2 days' journey away, with the horse pulling their cart. Laurent knew of an inn where they could rest for the night along their route. Her 4 remaining siblings gathered outside their cottage to bid them farewell. Among them lingered a mix of relief and unspoken admiration. They were grateful not to be left entirely alone for too long. The journey was solemn for both Laurent and Camille. The pleasant weather held throughout their first day, and their night at the inn passed quietly without incident. On the second day of their adventure, the air turned brisk and gloomy, signaling the arrival of autumn in the forest. Brown leaves, the first to fall to the ground, danced across their path while the wind whistled through the branches. Their faithful mare trotted along the road, steadily drawing them closer to a bittersweet farewell. As Laurent spotted the turnoff from the main road that led to the chateau, a heaviness settled in his heart with every step they took. Sensing her father's sorrow, Camille mustered her courage and offered him a gentle smile. "Don't worry, father," she reassured him. "I am strong. I will take care of things." He nodded, hoping her words would ring true. At last, they arrived at the dreary entrance of the estate. Laurent understood that this was the moment they had been anticipating. He pushed open the gate once more, guiding their horse through as they approached the imposing mansion for a second time. Camille gazed in wonder at what lay before her. The intricate gardens, now wild and overgrown, and the towering walls of the house were unlike anything she had ever encountered. It was both daunting and captivating in its starkness. Coming from a humble village background, Camille found herself speechless at its vastness, feeling overwhelmed by its enigma and permanence. The very stones seemed to be in a deep slumber, as if waiting patiently for someone to uncover their secrets. She contemplated the tasks that awaited her within those walls, hoping they were within her reach. Bringing their horse and cart to a stop at the wide front steps, Laurent braced himself against the wind that seemed determined to push them away from this threshold. They climbed slowly up the steps. Laurent lifted the heavy door knocker and let it fall with a resounding thud. Father and daughter stood at the entrance, waiting for the stern master of the house to appear. To their surprise, when the door creaked open, it revealed a boy who looked about 13 years old, dressed simply in village clothing. He peered out at them with genuine curiosity before nodding approvingly. "Are one of you here as the new servant?" he asked. Taken aback for a moment, Laurent explained that he had brought his daughter Camille to work off his debt in his stead. The boy nodded as if this were entirely expected and opened the door wider, inviting her inside with a gesture. With that, the voice scurried away into the shadows of the house, likely to announce that the new servant awaited with the breeze at her back. Camille stepped through the doorway and into her new life. It was a poignant farewell for both Laurent and Camille, yet they both wore brave faces. The loyal mare turned towards home, the heavy skies pressing down upon them, and only glanced back once they were beyond the gates of the chateau. Then, the swaying trees of the forest enveloped them behind. Camille stood hesitantly in the echoing hallway. The dim light filtering through tall windows above the door did little to dispel the chill of the overcast day. She stifled a shiver as she moved closer to her trunk containing her belongings. She reminded herself to summon her courage and do her utmost. After a few moments, a boy came dashing back into the hall, proclaiming that the Baron had instructed him to escort her to her room. With that, he cheerfully hoisted her trunk and began hauling it up the grand curving staircase. Camille trailed behind him, taken aback that they were ascending rather than descending to a kitchen or lower quarters. Perhaps she would be staying in an attic. To her astonishment, the boy veered down the first opulent corridor as they padded along the richly carpeted east wing of the chateau. Their quiet footsteps echoed past portraits of nobles from ages long past, their gazes fixed upon this unexpected visitor as if she were an uninvited guest in their timeless abode. So captivated was Camille by their stares that she nearly bumped into the boy when he finally halted before a door and pushed it open. Stepping inside after him, Camille was taken aback to find herself in the most exquisitely appointed bedroom she'd ever encountered. It wasn't overly spacious, nor were its furnishings extravagant. However, the canopied bed, fine fabrics, and rich wooden accents spoke of luxury. As she took in her surroundings, the inviting window seat and dainty dressing table, the boy announced his intentions and set about lighting a fire in the grate. Once it crackled cheerfully, he stood back with dusted hands and beamed at her. "I'm Gabriel," he introduced himself, "and I assist the Baron with various tasks around here. I'm so glad you've arrived. It can feel quite lonely at times, and I could really use some help with everyday matters." Camille felt uncertain about how to reply, though curiosity stirred within her regarding what those everyday matters might entail. She simply thanked him for starting the fire and inquired when she might meet her new employer. Gabriel gently informed her that the Baron had expressed his intention to meet with her the following day, at which time he would clarify her responsibilities. For now, the young boy would be bringing her a modest supper and wished for her to have a restful night. With that, Gabriel departed as quietly as he had entered, closing the door softly behind him. Camille took a moment to gather herself before starting to unpack her belongings. She hung her clothes in the ample wardrobe and carefully placed her few books on a side table beside the bed. As she opened one of the volumes, she discovered a delicate pink rose tucked between its pages, which brought a wistful smile to her lips. After closing the book and setting it aside, she wandered over to the window, pulled back the heavy drapes, and nestled into the soft cushions of the window seat. From this vantage point, she enjoyed a sweeping view of the courtyard, where gardens flourished wildly along the pathways and climbed up the stone walls of the chateau. As dusk settled in, a gentle breeze stirred debris across the cobbled yard, creating tiny whirlwinds that danced about. Dark clouds hurried past the newly risen moon. Exhausted from her travels and feeling out of place in this unfamiliar setting, she soon dozed off amid the folds of curtains. A gentle knock at her door stirred her from slumber. Unraveling herself from the cozy window seat, she took a deep breath before opening the door to find a tray waiting for her outside, laden with a simple meal of bread, cheese, soup, and warm tea. Scanning the hallway for any sign of Gabriel revealed nothing. He certainly moved with quiet grace. She brought the tray inside and set it down on a small table near the fireplace. Starving after her journey, she savored every bite of her meal. Skipping any elaborate nighttime rituals, she pulled back the coverlet and slipped into the inviting warmth of her sheets and pillow before quickly drifting off to sleep. Throughout the night, Camille experienced strange dreams. She found herself wandering through shadowy hallways of the chateau, trailing after a large dog that would vanish into various rooms only to reappear moments later in the corridor. Eager to catch up with it, she arrived at a doorway just as it disappeared from sight. Peeking into the room beyond revealed not a dog, but rather a man seated at a desk with his back turned to her. Just as he began to turn his chair towards her, she jolted awake. Sitting upright in bed, she noticed how faintly flickering firelight illuminated the room, while sunlight streamed brightly through her window. As her initial bewilderment faded, a gentle knock echoed at her door. Standing there was Gabriel, balancing a tray in his hands. "Good morning, Miss Mille," he said with a polite smile. "I've brought you some breakfast." He gestured vaguely toward the doorway, adding, "The Baron would like to see you in his study once you've finished." Camille nodded at the young boy, accepted the tray, and watched as he slipped away. An hour later, Camille found herself anxiously standing before the very door where her father had once enjoyed his secret meals by the fire. She could hear the sound of papers rustling from within. Taking a deep breath, she cleared her throat and knocked softly on the door. The noise ceased, and she heard a chair scraping against the floor. In a moment, a man with an impressive beard appeared. His features were rather exaggerated, and his expression seemed to be permanently set in a scowl. He was quite an intimidating figure, but Camille made sure not to let her apprehension show. She offered a polite nod in greeting. The large man scrutinized her for a moment before returning a hesitant nod of acknowledgement. He then motioned for her to take a seat in a chair near the fire. With that, He settled into the armchair across from her. "Understand that you will be the one to help repay your father's debt," he said. "Are you experienced in basic household chores, like cleaning and cooking?" Camille nodded, confirming her skills. The man seemed pleased by her response. He lifted a hefty ring of keys from a nearby table. "As you can see, I am quite short on assistance here," he continued. "Gabriel tends to my essential needs. His mother supplies me with bread, milk, and eggs each day, while he runs errands to town. However, there is no one else to oversee the estate besides myself. You can surely tell that just by looking around. It's still too much work for just you and Gabriel, but we will manage." He paused, as if expecting a response. Camille felt a wave of anxiety at the thought of being the sole housekeeper in such a vast mansion. Yet she sensed it was futile to voice her concerns. The man went on. "These keys grant access to most rooms in the house, though there isn't much need to enter many of them. If there's something that Gabriel cannot fetch for you, please come to me directly. Otherwise, I prefer that you make as many household decisions independently as possible. I tend to spend most of my time in my study or the library." Overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task ahead of her, Camille could only nod, signaling that their conversation had concluded. He stood up abruptly. Camille rose from her chair, accepted the ancient-looking keys from him with a nod of acknowledgement. As she turned to leave the room, he called after her. "Dinner is at 7 p.m., and it would be wise for you to join me in the dining room." Camille bobbed her head in agreement, thanked him softly, and exited the study. Standing somewhat dazed in the echoing front hall, she felt both lost within its vastness and as if it were closing in around her. Spreading the heavy keys across her open palm, she gazed at them thoughtfully. Unsure of what doors they might unlock, she sensed an unspoken authority emanating from them. Her contemplation was interrupted by Gabriel stepping out from the shadows. With a bright grin aimed at her, he asked if she would like a tour. Gratefully accepting his offer, Camille stepped into her new adventure as the housekeeper at the chateau. What Camille discovered was that the employer lived in solitude, having done so for many years, largely due to his intimidating appearance that instilled fear in the locals. They circulated unkind tales about him and treated him with disdain whenever he ventured into public. Gabriel, however, was the sole link between the Baron and the outside world. He had begun by running errands for the Baron many years ago, but had soon come to cherish and respect the man beyond his stern exterior. He reassured Camille that the Baron's growl was far worse than his actual nature. Now, Gabriel dedicated each day to tending to the needs of the house, returning at night to his family's modest dwelling on the town's outskirts. "Believe me, miss," he urged earnestly, "the Baron is a just and compassionate soul." Gabriel guided Camille through the many rooms and corridors of the grand chateau, which bore signs of neglect in numerous areas. The dimly lit hallways were lined with unused bedrooms, their furnishings cloaked in dust sheets. The fireplaces stood cold, some rooms untouched for decades, or even centuries. Furniture and possessions lay piled high in these spaces, shrouded in cobwebs. The windows struggled to allow light to filter through due to layers of grime that had accumulated over time. As Camille explored her surroundings, she quickly realized that only a handful of rooms were in regular use. and it was her task to clean and organize them. These included the kitchen, the Baron's study, and the front entryway. Yet the most breathtaking room of all was the library. Gabriel kindly offered her a glimpse while the Baron was occupied elsewhere, and Camille was utterly captivated by what lay before her. The library was a grand expanse with soaring ceilings adorned with golden accents. Towering bookcases reached up to the ceiling, lining every wall save for where windows let in soft light. At each end of the room stood rolling ladders, poised to glide along the shelves and grant access to any book within reach. There seemed to be an endless array of volumes, their spines boasting colors like deep crimson, rich forest green, deep navy blue, and warm brown, each one inviting her to pick it up and explore its contents. As an avid reader who had cherished the few books she owned during her father's financial struggles, Camille had never encountered such an extraordinary collection. Gabriel mentioned that the Baron often spent hours here, and it certainly appeared to be true. Tables scattered throughout this luxurious haven were heaped with books open to specific pages or clustered together in thoughtful disarray. Well-worn leather armchairs suggested countless hours spent lost in their hefty pages. Gabriel solemnly informed her that he was responsible for keeping the fire burning brightly in the grate throughout the day. Camille envisioned herself sinking into one of those plush chairs, opening one of the many volumes, and inhaling the rich scent of aged paper steeped in ink, a truly enchanting thought. She understood that if she wanted to make progress in this neglected house, she simply needed to choose a spot and begin. On that first day, she and Gabriel dusted off and aired out the front hall while tidying up the kitchen. For quite some time, Gabriel and the Baron had been preparing simple meals there. However, much of the space needed attention. Though not a culinary expert by any means, Camille took delight in restoring the kitchen's former shine. She sent Gabriel into town with a shopping list and then set about her work in the grand yet quiet kitchen. Countertops free from dust were cleared away, pots and pans were polished until they gleamed, and gradually the once cold and empty space began to feel alive again. By the time she sat down to share a meal with the Baron, she had prepared a simple dish of roasted chicken. It may not have been extravagant, but she felt a swell of pride at what she had accomplished. With only a brief moment to prepare, Camille returned to her room. Gabriel had rekindled the fire, and she took the opportunity to freshen up at her washstand, slipping into her finest dress. As she approached the window to draw the curtains for the evening, she paused, peering out into the enveloping darkness. The courtyard was hushed, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. Not a single creature stirred. Even the birds were silent. The ground seemed to be wrapped in a tranquil spell of stillness. With a gentle tug, she closed the velvet curtains and reluctantly turned away from the window. There was so much yet to uncover about this place, she thought. Lighting a candle, she ventured down the dimly lit hallway and descended the grand staircase. Soon, she stood before the tall doors of the dining room. The space was remarkably opulent for just 2 guests. It must have hosted lavish gatherings and splendid formal dinners in days gone by. Gazing upwards, she admired the shimmering crystal chandelier that hung above like a canopy of stars. At one end of the long table Gabriel had set 2 places, and dinner awaited her arrival. She was the first to enter. It wasn't long before the Baron's imposing figure appeared awkwardly in the doorway. He paused briefly to nod in acknowledgement. With a gesture towards the 2 settings, he invited her to take a seat. Camille happily settled into one of the plush chairs. "I see you and Gabriel have been quite industrious today," remarked the Baron, raising his eyebrows at the hearty meal laid out before them. "He has shouldered much as my sole assistant over these past years. I'm glad you'll be here to help share some of his responsibilities." Camille nodded, feeling uncertain about how to reply. "You are my lord," she began hesitantly, but he shook his head gently. "Please, just call me Antoine," he said with a hint of warmth in his voice. "I am lord of nothing now, merely lord of this chateau and its collection of dusty relics," he added with a wry smile. With a gentle gaze into her eyes, he said, "I regret the circumstances that have led you here, but I sincerely hope you find solace. I aim to be just, and I am truly glad to have your company." Camille nodded, a brief smile gracing her lips. "Would you like me to organize the library tomorrow?" she asked. "I wasn't certain if you wanted me to go in." After a moment's reflection, the Baron nodded in agreement, granting her permission. He added, "Feel free to borrow any book that piques your interest from the library. As Descartes once remarked, reading great literature is like conversing with the finest minds of history. You'll find my library boasts an impressive array of titles, encompassing every book you can imagine. It's quite enchanting in that way." Surprised by his kind gesture and cultured manner, Camille observed her somewhat melancholic employer as he dined. Having only spent a day at the chateau, her outlook and her situation had already begun to transform. She now realized she was the mistress of a splendid estate with the liberty to work as she wished, and she had just been granted access to an extensive library. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events wouldn't be as grim as she had initially feared. Lost in thought over her plate in the flickering firelight, all she could hear was the soft clinking of silverware against china. Throughout dinner, Camille and the Baron exchanged few words, choosing instead to enjoy their meal in a respectful silence. Later that night, as she nestled comfortably within the crisp white sheets of her sumptuous canopy bed, Camille felt a sense of hope blossom within her. This secluded estate held many fascinating secrets, and she eagerly looked forward to discovering them in time. Rolling onto her side, she sleepily admired the tightly drawn drapes that shielded her from the darkness outside. Inside the chateau, a flame danced softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow that enveloped her. The next day, after tidying up the kitchen, Camille made her way cautiously to the library. Knowing that the Baron was preoccupied in his study, she seized this opportunity to explore the magnificent collection of books under the pretense of cleaning. Equipped with a duster, she diligently moved around the books and tables, attending to surfaces that had long been neglected and gathered dust. Just as she was about to shift a stack of books, Antoine appeared in the doorway. "Kindly avoid disturbing any of the stacks or opening any books," he gently asked. Camille, realizing her mistake, quickly stepped away from the pile she had touched. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with regret. "There's no need to apologize," he replied with a warm smile. I know it might appear a bit messy. I'm in the midst of some research and would hate to lose my spot. He then asked if she had chosen a book for herself. She replied that she hadn't and sought his recommendations. Camille admitted feeling somewhat inadequate when it came to understanding such profound literature, as her background was not as scholarly as his. Antoine smiled warmly, gestured expansively, and said, "Acknowledging one's ignorance is the first step toward wisdom." Noticing her confusion, he playfully winked and explained that this sage advice was attributed to Socrates. He crossed the room and retrieved a small book from a lower shelf, handing it to her with care. Perhaps you might find pleasure in some of his other thoughts. He firmly believed in the importance of asking questions. Camille accepted the book with a grateful nod. Just as she was about to leave the room, she paused and indicated that she did have a question after all. "Is there a way for me to hire some villagers to tidy up the gardens before winter?" she asked. Antoine looked at her with a hint of sadness and shrugged. "If Gabriel can find anyone willing to come onto the estate, you're welcome to do so. Sadly, most are reluctant to enter the chateau grounds due to the wild stories that have circulated about me over the years, which has left me quite isolated." Camille frowned at this revelation. "How do you manage? Doesn't it upset you to be treated so unfairly?" Le Baron gazed down thoughtfully before responding, "I was once a more handsome yet vain and foolish man. It took a great misfortune for me to recognize my errors and understand the disdain people hold for me. Perhaps it is merely retribution for my past mistakes." Camille fell silent, choosing not to ask any further questions that day, but resolved to learn more about how her employer had ended up in such a difficult position. For now, she looked forward to exploring Socrates' writings in her room after dinner. Camille quickly adapted to her new role as the housekeeper of the chateau, and even began to embrace it wholeheartedly. With some gentle persuasion, she convinced Gabriel to hire a few local men, who arrived one day and cleared away years of neglect from the gardens. This was done only after Camille gave them strict instructions to protect the rose bush near the pergola, which had been planted by Antoine's mother and held deep sentimental value for him. She nearly wished she hadn't invited the men from the village into her home when she overheard their unkind remarks about Antoine. "He's an absolute monster," one of them declared loudly to his companion. "He lives like an animal in there," another chimed in, "with no manners and utterly unfit for human company. But I wouldn't mind taking his money," he added dismissively. Camille caught sight of Antoine by the window, absorbing every word of their conversation. In a hurry, she rushed to close the window, desperate to protect him from their harshness. Antoine waved her off as if it didn't bother him. "I've grown used to this kind of talk," he said calmly. "It's been many years since I've mingled with society." Still troubled, Camille asked, "How can you endure such injustice? They don't even know you. How can you not despise them?" He shrugged, his gaze drifting to a stack of books on a nearby table. A great English playwright named William Shakespeare once penned, "There's no furnace for your foe so hot that it does not singe yourself by bearing goodwill for these ignorant souls. I lighten my own burden by doing so." With a gentle smile and a nod toward Camille, he suggested, "You might enjoy reading Shakespeare yourself. His plays are quite remarkable." Then he returned to his books, leaving Camille to reflect on his words and the gloomy day beyond. Despite the heavy workload that awaited her each day, Camille found pockets of time to explore the house. As autumn settled in with its brisk days, early dusks, and cool evenings, she would meander through the corridors with a candle in hand, using her hefty ring of keys to unlock the many closed doors lining the halls. Most rooms turned out to be bedrooms, hinting that this chateau had once welcomed numerous esteemed guests from noble circles. Each darkened chamber revealed elegant four-poster beds draped in dust sheets, fine furniture, and chairs covered in faded fabric. One day, she discovered what seemed to be a particularly special room, a lady's chamber unlike any other, still filled with remnants of her life. A delicate dressing table was adorned with jars of powder and sparkling perfume bottles catching the afternoon light. Nearby stood elaborate wigs from long ago on their own stands, as if patiently awaiting a grand ball. As Camille opened the wardrobe, she was taken aback by a stunning array of silk dresses from the pre-revolution era. She delicately brushed her fingers against their fragile skirts, almost fearful that they might crumble at her touch. Imagining the graceful lady who once wore these exquisite garments, the room around her seemed to shimmer with echoes of the past. When she turned to the chest of drawers, she found it brimming with sparkling necklaces. Nestled within a small velvet box was a ring set with a glistening sapphire. Camille carefully closed the box, ensuring it appeared as if she hadn't taken anything at all. With a twinge of regret, she left the room and secured the door once more. It felt like a portal to a time filled with joy, and it was undoubtedly the most enchanting sight she had ever witnessed in that house. Camille wrote letters to her father diligently, which Gabriel would take to town during his errands. In her letters, she reassured him that she was well cared for and enjoying her work. Gradually, she even began sending him some money. After her first month, the Baron informed her that he couldn't permit her to work without compensation, since she had more than compensated for the damage done to the rose bush. He expressed his wish for her to remain and offered her a weekly salary for her contributions, which Camille accepted with delight. As Antoine's housekeeper, she felt as though she had discovered her true vocation. Her organizational talents flourished, and the delightful company, along with access to his remarkable library, became her greatest sources of happiness. Though Antoine was often deemed unattractive, nothing about him had changed except that Camille took care to ensure his clothing was tidy and presentable. Occasionally, as he walked by or during their conversations, she caught glimpses of an ordinary yet handsome man in the mirror. In those moments, he appeared less rugged and his features seemed softer. However, after blinking and refocusing her gaze, the same fearsome visage returned. It felt as if the dark enchantments of the chateau were playing tricks on her perception. With a hint of irony, she observed that sometimes a beggar would knock at their door, unaware of the estate's grim reputation in her village. Typically, beggars were turned away and rarely received help. The townsfolk seemed to believe that those in poverty deserved their fate, and that diligent individuals would never find themselves in such unfortunate situations. Camille had expected Antoine to send them away, but to her astonishment, he asked her to hand over the exquisite coins before they left. Intrigued, Camille couldn't help but question his unexpected generosity, especially since no one around him had shown him any kindness. Once again, he referenced a philosopher he admired, Aristotle, saying, "A truly noble man seeks no favors, but is always ready to extend kindness to others." With a hint of regret in his voice, he added, "I must strive to become a more noble man, because it was my past choices that led me astray." Though Camille was eager to learn more about his story, she couldn't pry any further at that moment. Her heart yearned for a deeper understanding of Antoine. Later that evening, they found themselves sharing a cozy conversation in the softly lit dining room while savoring a warm winter stew. It was during this intimate moment that Camille gathered her courage and asked about the reason for Antoine's solitude in the chateau. After a brief pause, filled with contemplation, Antoine let out a heavy sigh, leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his drink, and began to share his tale. "Years ago," he began, "I lived here with my mother. After my father passed away when I was just a child, I inherited the lordship of this estate. My mother was a radiant spirit who spread joy and kindness wherever she went. She lovingly tended to the rose bush that your father stripped of its blossoms." Antoine hesitated for a moment, clearly troubled by the memories, before continuing. "When my mother fell ill and eventually passed away, I found myself alone and unprepared for what lay ahead. Regrettably, I did not rise to meet my responsibilities. Young and reckless, I squandered our family's fortune on trivial luxuries and extravagant celebrations. The estate fell into neglect. Debts piled up while I mistreated those who worked for me. Without my mother's guiding hand, I descended into a life of excess that brought no value to anyone, not even myself." He paused again, as if lost in thought before continuing with his story. "One fateful evening during one of my lavish parties, my servant came to inform me about a woman who stood at our door seeking food and assistance. Caught up in the revelry around me, I heartlessly dismissed her request and told my servant to tell her to find work elsewhere. But before he could usher her away, she pushed her way inside and foretold that my arrogance would lead to my undoing. She cursed me to live in solitude and devoid of love until I learned compassion and sought redemption." With a puzzled expression, Camille knitted her brows together. Humanity? What could she have meant by that? Antoine shrugged his shoulders in response. "That is the mystery that has haunted me for many years. Even with access to an immense library brimming with the insights of philosophers, mathematicians, and poets, I remain ensnared by my curse. Although my mind expands, the collective wisdom of humanity has yet to unveil a route to my liberation." Camille studied him from across the table, listening to the gentle crackling of the fire that punctuated their silence. She envisioned him sitting alone before countless fires over many long years, devoid of companionship. How many seasons had he spent confined within this solitary prison, leafing through endless volumes in search of redemption? Antoine attempted to lighten the mood with a bright smile. "Oh well," he remarked cheerfully. "As the great Isaac Newton once said, To arrive at the simplest truth requires years of contemplation. Perhaps one day I will discover the answer hidden away like a secret beneath her covers that night. In that moment, Camille felt as if she had finally pieced together a puzzle. All those years, Antoine had dedicated himself to studying, reflecting, absorbing knowledge, and seeking atonement. He was no longer a man who would deny kindness even to those deemed unworthy. Yet she couldn't help but wonder what else lay within his grasp. Would he forever remain confined among his books and the dusty remnants of a regrettable past? She hoped not. Her admiration for him had grown deeply. Pulling the covers snugly around her chin, she gazed sleepily at the glowing embers in the hearth. Wrapped in the stillness of the house, she drifted off into slumber once more. Throughout the crisp chill of winter, Camille and Antoine continued their lives at the chateau in warm companionship alongside Gabriel, their steadfast link to the world beyond. Many rooms in the grand mansion remained locked and untouched. The areas they occupied for their daily routines were cozy and tidy under Camille's diligent care. Their meals were simple yet nourishing. Outside, blinding white snow piled high in the courtyard, while occasionally a bleak wind whistled through deserted corridors. Yet within those walls, the inhabitants of the chateau found solace by the firesides, lost in their books and each other's company. At long last, the first whispers of spring graced the land. Camille received a letter from her father, sharing the joyous news that her eldest sister had found a suitor, and their wedding was set to take place in just a few weeks. He inquired if the Baron might permit her some time off to join the celebrations at home. If permission were granted, Laurent would be more than happy to come and escort her from the estate. When Camille brought this request to Antoine, he set aside his book, looked at her with a wistful smile, and replied, "Naturally, she should go and take as much time as she needs." As she expressed her gratitude for his approval, she found herself once again seeing not a beast before her, but a man. She blinked several times, trying to shake off the fleeting illusion. As she exited the room, she paused for a moment, glancing back at him over her shoulder. Then she left him to his reading and tucked that moment away in her heart. Her journey to and from her sister's wedding passed without incident. Upon her return, family members greeted her with curiosity and perhaps a touch of newfound admiration. They admired the elegant new garments she had purchased with her earnings. It was clear that the money she had been sending home had played a part in securing her sister's marriage. Though modest in nature, this match lifted their family's standing in the eyes of the villagers. They were no longer seen as destitute. Instead, they were regarded as stable and respectable due to Camille's steady income. Yet, despite these changes, Camille felt increasingly out of place in the family cottage. Even though she had spent all this time within the chateau's walls, it seemed as if her perspective had shifted and her horizons broadened immensely. Sitting by the fire with siblings who were preoccupied with their own trivial worries made her feel confined. She felt a pang of regret at having to leave her father once more, but relief washed over her when he bid farewell at the gates of Antoine's estate. She was ready to embrace her role as mistress of the house again. However, that happiness quickly turned to concern upon seeing the chaos that awaited her return. Gabriel answered the door with eager delight, clearly thrilled by her presence. He leaned in close and whispered that nothing had been quite right since she'd laughed last. Even the Baron had become disheveled and remained locked away in his library. After tidying up her belongings, Camille made her way directly to Antoine. As she gently pushed open the door to the library, she was met with a chaotic sight. Books lay strewn about, many opened and stacked haphazardly, creating a scene of disarray. The floor was cluttered with empty glasses, and the tables were no better off. Antoine slouched in a chair, appearing as though he hadn't changed his shirt in days. At the sound of her entrance, he looked up, revealing a look of sheepish relief. In that moment, Camille felt as if she were seeing him merely as an ordinary man, and she wrestled with this perception. Logically, she recognized that before her sat a disheveled figure, unkempt and unshaven, a rather beastly sight indeed. Yet her eyes seemed to deceive her for a moment longer. Finally, she could see him clearly again. Yes, there he was, in desperate need of some cheering up. It took Camille just a few days to restore order to the chaos. The dust and neglect of recent weeks were swiftly addressed, and upon her return, Antoine's spirits lifted almost at once. However, Gabriel confided in her that perhaps it would be best if she left again. He explained that the Baron had plunged into a deep melancholy and had become utterly incapable of managing even the simplest tasks, like remembering to eat. Yet with spring bursting forth across the estate, it was hard to remain sad for long. Camille was filled with joy as she had managed to clear the garden before the arrival of winter. The courtyard now sparkled with beauty, showcasing the lovely plantings that Antoine's mother had lovingly arranged many years ago. Vibrant flowers of every hue blossomed gracefully, enhancing the enchanting atmosphere. Each day, more birds seemed to arrive, their sweet melodies filling the mornings and beckoning the residents of the chateau to bask in the garden's splendor. Camille and Antoine began to savor their afternoons beneath the pergola, often allowing Gabriel to finish his chores early so they could unwind together. Camille delighted in opening the windows of the once stuffy mansion, inviting in refreshing breezes. The entire estate felt revitalized, as if a new chapter of life was unfolding. As summer drew near, Camille received another letter from her father announcing her sister's upcoming wedding. She found herself torn between the obligation to attend this family celebration and her desire not to part from Antoine once again. To navigate this conflict, she proposed an unusual plan. Antoine would join her at the wedding and stay at a nearby inn. Initially taken aback by this suggestion, Antoine expressed concern about how he might be perceived by others. Camille comforted him, assuring him that her village was far away and that its inhabitants would not have any preconceived notions about him. She no longer viewed him as a monster, but rather as the wise and gentle man she had come to cherish. She was confident that her community would welcome him with open arms. The thought of a nobleman attending a village wedding did not faze Camille. She had long since stopped seeing Antoine as a beast, or merely a baron. Though hesitant at first, Antoine ultimately agreed to accompany Camille to ensure she wouldn't miss her sister's special day. He seemed anxious about what lay ahead and wore a solemn expression during their preparations. Undeterred by his mood, Camille arranged for Gabrielle to visit the tailor in town to have a new suit crafted for Antoine, one that fit him perfectly. She had noticed he still wore clothes that belonged to another era, while contemporary styles favored cleaner lines and simpler designs. Her aim was for him to don an outfit that would present him as dignified and modern, rather than as someone lost in time. The rooms where they had been busy preparing were finally ready, and the carriage shone after a thorough cleaning. At last, the day came when Gabriel bade farewell to the couple as they set off on their journey. It was a momentous occasion for him, as he had never seen the Baron depart from the estate before. He reassured them that he would keep everything in order during their absence. The ride to Camille's village was a swift one, taking just a day under the warm embrace of summer's vibrant splendor. As the horse trotted along the forest path, sunlight filtered joyfully through the leafy canopy above, casting playful rays upon the road ahead and whispering sweetly in the gentle breeze. At first, Antoine remained quiet, seemingly reluctant to acknowledge that he was traveling with Camille in public. However, after a few miles, he began discussing a book she had been reading, and soon their familiar playful banter filled the air once more. Camille couldn't help but smile to herself as she watched his charming qualities shine through. From her vantage point beside him, it felt as though she was seated next to a true gentleman, and she was content to let that delightful illusion linger. Eventually, their enjoyable journey came to an end as dusk descended and crickets began their evening serenade in the fields. Antoine and Camille arrived at her family's cozy cottage and brought the carriage to a halt before disembarking. Standing at the front door were her entire family, with her 4 unmarried siblings casting curious glances at them both. Laurent made a commendable effort to gather himself. He stepped forward with grace and greeted Antoine warmly, expressing gratitude for escorting Camille and honoring them with his presence. Yet Camille felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment when her brother leaned in to whisper something mischievous to her older sister, prompting a giggle from her sibling. It was clear that they were teasing about the Baron's visit. A collective sigh of relief swept through everyone as Antoine took his leave for his lodgings. Inside the cottage, Camille allowed herself to be guided into the warmth of home, where she spent the evening chatting with Laurent and her siblings about wedding preparations with polite curiosity. Still, worry tugged at her heart as she thought about Antoine's stay at the inn. She hoped he was being treated well. As she nestled into bed that night, thoughts of him swirled through her mind like soft clouds in a twilight sky. She realized she would be relieved once they had finished the wedding and returned to the chateau, which she now considered her true home. Grim was the atmosphere when he arrived at the church the following day for the wedding. It was evident that Camille's fears had materialized. They sat in silence throughout the ceremony, both sensing the weight of everyone's gaze upon them. The small church felt even smaller, with the entire congregation scrutinizing them. The post-ceremony celebration took place on the village green. The gathering was modest, yet lively with punch, cakes, and wildflowers. Amidst the cheerful ambiance, ladies gathered in clusters, delicately savoring sweets, while children frolicked across the lawn, reveling in an afternoon of play. Camille and Antoine, however, felt detached from the festivities. She stood rigidly by his side, acknowledging the villagers who had once shown her kindness. The once welcoming individuals who had taught her gardening and baking years ago now kept their distance, whispering amongst themselves and casting knowing glances in her direction. Not a single neighbor had a kind word for Antoine, who smiled politely but remained silent. Her own family offered no support, completely ignoring the couple. As Camille and Antoine stood there, fervently wishing for the party to come to an end, they caught snippets of a conversation between two men nearby. "You might have wealth," one sneered, "but he'll never convince anyone to marry him with a face like that." The other man chuckled in response. "What a shame it is when you have to woo your own maid." Those words were the last straw for Camille. Setting her punch down with determination, she made her way to the center of the gathering, asserting that she had something important to share and demanding everyone's attention. "I persuaded the Baron to join me here because I believed you all to be good people," she proclaimed. "I was convinced that his noble character and kindness would show you that he is not the monster you think he is. However, I must confess I was wrong. None of you are worthy of his respect. We shall no longer impose upon you. Let me be clear. Antoine is a far better man than any of you. I would choose him as my companion over each and every one of you 100 times over, and that is the honest truth." A hush fell over the crowd as they stared in astonishment from Camille to Antoine and back again. When she turned to look at him, she was met with an unexpected sight. Where once stood her beloved friend was now a strikingly handsome man, his dignified smile directed gratefully toward her. Despite her efforts to clear her mind and refocus her vision, his appearance remained unchanged. The heavy facial hair, pronounced features, and commanding presence were gone. He was as handsome as any man she had ever seen, and that fact remained intact. Whether it was a shift in perspective or perhaps a touch of magic at play, the other guests continued their festivities as if nothing had happened. They greeted Antoine warmly and smiled at Camille as if everything were perfectly normal. It felt as though the embarrassing incident had vanished into thin air. The villagers acted as though they had never encountered a beast among them before. It was a moment both bewildering and wondrous. A curtain had been drawn back forever. This serene instance of victory signified Antoine's ultimate liberation from the spell that had bound him. For many years, he had scoured his library, seeking wisdom among the pages of humanity's greatest thinkers. Yet, he had misinterpreted the intentions of the woman who had cast her curse upon him. The solitary decades spent nurturing kindness, generosity, and forgiveness had blossomed within him, the very humanity that captured Camille's heart. This was the crucial element that shattered his enchantment. Shortly thereafter, Camille and Antoine found themselves together beneath the pergola in his garden, marveling at his mother's rosebush, which was once again flourishing with vibrant blooms. As twilight enveloped the chateau, crickets began their gentle serenade. The joyful couple reveled in the warm summer evening, and Camille gazed at the transformed Antoine, admiring the handsome visage that had long been hidden beneath a beastly guise. As she watched, he straightened up and pulled from his pocket the ring she had once admired in his mother's dresser. "You were the only one who truly endeavored to understand me," he said softly to her. Then, with a charming grin, he quoted from one of his many beloved books. As Copernicus remarked, at the center of it all lies the sun. You have become that sun. With a playful wink, he added, "In truth, I believe you have shown yourself more than capable of overseeing this chateau." Camille chuckled and nodded in agreement as he slipped the sparkling blue gem onto her finger. Mesmerized by its brilliance, she recalled her first encounter with it in that enigmatic bedroom filled with elegant gowns and other treasures. It shimmered in the sunlight as if whispering a cherished secret to her. Now she felt herself becoming woven into the rich tapestry of this estate's history. Before summer drew to a close, Antoine and Camille exchanged their vows in the courtyard of the chateau, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of blooming roses and the sweet melodies of birds perched high in the trees. Standing in the shadow of their home, Camille looked at Antoine with a heart brimming with gratitude, feeling an overwhelming sense of belonging in a place that had once felt so foreign to her. This was no longer the desolate abode she had encountered just a year prior. Through kindness, patience, and a quest for understanding, they had unearthed true happiness together.